Hey friend, hit subscribe. Takes you a second, but it means the world to me. And please leave a comment on the Revenge Veil channel telling us which city you're watching this story from. That really helps the channel grow. Thank you. Now back to the story. 3 months after the gala, my father sat alone in a courtroom, his hand trembling on a cane he had never needed before. Hazel hadn't spoken to anyone. Mother Evelyn stopped answering the door. All because of one question he asked under chandeliers and champagne. That tiny public moment set a private avalanche in motion. The hall glittered that night. Cameras winked like small stars. People moved through light and laughter. I stood by a pillar, wine cheap and warm in my palm. He raised his glass and looked right at me. He said, "Anna, have you moved into the Carter estate in Sonoma?" The quartet stopped mid-phrase. A fork hit a plate like a book slammed shut. Hazel's face went white. Mother Evelyn squeezed my fingers until they ached. I didn't know what he meant. The perfume that night smelled like gardenia and lacquered wood. The napkins had gold edges. My voice came out thinner than I wanted. I said, "Estate." Hazel forced a smile. She said, "Yes, father. That's right." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. The lie hung between them like a crack in glass. I could not sleep. The question looped. At dawn I walked to the county records office. Fluorescent lights buzzed. A janitor pushed a cart. The clerk slid a stapled packet across the counter without looking up. I paid with cash I'd been saving for groceries. Back in my small apartment, the title deed lay on my nightstand like a cold promise. The paper smelled faintly of toner. My name stared back in neat, practiced letters. My signature was there, but it was traced. Too even. Too careful. Someone had copied the arc of my E the way a child copies cursive from a workbook. When I was small, my father taught me to sign my name. He would take my hand, heavy and firm, and guide it. E-loop tail. He called it practice. He called it preparedness. He did not call it ownership then. But the motion of that taut E was the same-handed stroke on the forged deed. That memory turned the paper into a bruise that remembered. I went to the house that night. Marble floors echoed like cold footsteps. Paintings watched like patient judges. Hazel lay on a silk sofa. Perfect lighting across her face. I threw the packet on the coffee table and said, "Why did you forge my signature?" She blinked and smoothed her robe. She said, "Anna, you don't understand. This was always meant for me." Mother Evelyn hovered in the doorway, lips thin. Father Robert came in like a weather front. He said, "Let her speak." I spread the papers for him. He skimmed and said to Hazel, "You were careless." Her breath hitched. They closed ranks like a wall. Revenge was never in shouting. It lived in patience and precision. I made myself small in plain sight. I smiled at fundraisers. I ate past hors d'oeuvres and laughed at jokes that weren't mine. I kept the deed folded in the corner of my drawer like a talisman. I touched that crease before sleep. The deed became the thing they had tried to write over me. There was another theft that cut deeper in a different tempo. Grandpa Harold had always been my small harbor. He called me his my granddaughter. A private joke that made me grin like a child. He liked plain things. He hated pomp. Once, after I got my first real paycheck, he said, "No one should walk in rain if they can avoid it." He promised me a car. He bought a small red Toyota, simple, honest, practical. He said it would keep me from trudging through storms. That car was supposed to be my safety. Instead, my parents gave it to Hazel. They didn't tell me. They didn't ask me. They handed my freedom to the golden child and smiled as if it were charity. I learned about the car one wet morning when my phone buzzed at the office. Grandpa Harold's voice was warm and surprised. "Sweetheart," he asked, "how's the car I bought you? Does it handle the rain?" My chest dropped. "What car?" I whispered. His silence filled my ears. Then, "You mean you never got it?" That was the moment I learned how casually my parents used what was mine. The car became a proof of pattern. It became rage with a license plate. I went to Grandpa. He dug an envelope from an old wallet and handed me the receipt. My name printed on the purchase. He said, "They lied. They gave it to Hazel." He was sorry in a way that made my throat ache. He gripped my hands and said, "Sweetheart, I'll make this right." He was old, but he had a temper for the right things. He stormed into my parents' house one evening and thudded his cane like punctuation. He said, "I bought that car for my granddaughter." He pointed at me. He said the words like a verdict. I remember my mother's face changing, the soft mask cracking. I did not want Grandpa to fight all my battles. I wanted control. So I planned. I took the keys one Saturday while Hazel slept and drove the car for the first time. The leather smelled new. The engine purred and I felt like breathing after drowning. I drove it to work and back. I kept it secret. Then I chose a stage where truth would be visible. My company's corporate event was a shallow, glossy thing Hazel loved. She wanted to be seen there. I parked the car at the front and stood beside it in a dress I had saved for months to buy. When Hazel arrived with Mother and Father, she froze. She hissed, "What are you doing with my car?" I smiled and pulled out the papers Grandpa had given me. I said, "Funny, because according to Grandpa and the receipt, this car is legally mine." Gasps threaded through the crowd. My boss's jaw tightened. Hazel stammered. My mother tried to speak, but the papers told the story. Pride turned to heat on their faces. They called me selfish that night. They demanded respect. I refused to hand back what was mine. 2 weeks later the car was gone, stolen, my parents said. In truth, Hazel used her father's contacts to falsify papers and take it. For a moment I broke. Then Grandpa did a thing I never expected. He threatened to cut them out of his will. He took me aside and whispered, "Let me help you finish this." With his help we filed quietly. By the time Hazel realized, it was too late. The forged papers collapsed under legal weight. In court, neighbors whispered, and Hazel sobbed as the judge declared the car legally mine. That car became more than wheels. It was evidence of a pattern, the way they redistributed the future. It fed the fire. It made me meticulous. The car gave me momentum and Grandpa gave me both testimony and a stubborn, righteous elbow. Back to the deed. I opened doors quietly. I messaged Mara, former assistant, on a brittle LinkedIn page. Mara met me in a diner that smelled of frying oil and old coffee. She wore a battered windbreaker. She pushed an envelope across the table and said, "At first the checks were small. You don't notice until the well is poisoned." Inside were photocopies of wire confirmations, notes with a hurried hand, a code that read Mon 12. She told me about late-night visitors and a key card that opened offices I'd never been allowed into. Luis met me beneath humming fluorescent lights in a parking garage. He smelled of paper and polish. He slid a fat folder toward me and said, "I kept copies because it felt wrong. I thought if I kept them maybe I could sleep." He showed me rows of numbers that looked like noise until you followed them. Transfers routed through a Nevada trust, then Montenegro LLC, then a consulting firm with only a P.O. box. He said, "You learn the tremor of a hand. You know when someone traced." He signed a statement that shook on the paper. He handed over a ledger where the Vineyard Purchase and a shell company were linked by a thin red thread. I collected these things like a scavenger. I photographed receipts under the blue light of my phone. I saved emails and invoices. I learned to read corporate phrases that hit like small blows. Intercompany transfer. Nominee director. Consulting fee. I labeled boxes. Payments, titles, charities. Evidence grows heavy when people believe money erases memory. There were threats. One night an unsigned note slid under my door. "Stop. Remember who you are." No name. The paper smelled of the building lobby. I taped it into the evidence folder and slept anyway. I started leaving my phone where it could be tracked. I planted a tiny GPS in my car. I learned to move without announcing myself. I found an ally in Jenna Park, a reporter who liked the scent of quiet facts. Jenna met me in a coffee shop with steam and old newspapers. She vetted documents like a priest checks a gospel. "Give a story a face," she said. "Let the deed be a face." We fed her small pieces. A wire, a name, an invoice. She ran a small piece in a local paper about a suspicious charity payment. The ripple arrived. A board member canceled a lunch. An assistant resigned. A donor stood and said, "We thought the funds went to food banks. Now there's a consulting firm on the invoice." The leak made the room more likely to listen. I trailed Hazel sometimes. Curiosity becomes duty. I followed her to a boutique hotel on the river and watched from a distance. The man she met had a jacket that spoke money. He kissed her temple like a trophy. I filmed a shaky clip and caught a license plate. Those small shards built a picture of who owed what. Hazel called me at midnight the week before the gala. Her voice was glassy and rehearsed. She said, "Anna, can we talk? Please." I let the recorder run in my pocket. She arrived with perfume and a practiced contrition. She sat too straight and placed her hands like props. She said, "I can fix this. Money. Papers. Sign a note that you were mistaken. Take it and move on." She offered coin like a bandage. Then she babbled details. She named the lawyer. She named a hotel where a courier misdelivered copies of titles. She listed people and morning routines as if they were safe secrets. She spoke specifics because she'd been living inside the pattern so long it felt ordinary. I kept the recording. I saved it 3 ways. The confession she didn't mean to give became a shard I could use. We planned the gala reveal like surgeons plan an operation. Jenna arranged a tech contact. The reel was rehearsed. The deed would be first domino. The ledger next. The empty charities after. We timed releases with whispers that made chairs rattle. The gala night smelled of roses and too much perfume. My father walked the stage in a tux that cut light. He spoke of legacy and generosity. A tech hand hit the wrong reel. My face filled a projection as crisp as daylight. My recorded voice said calm lines I had written. "My name is Anna Carter. While you applaud, I will show you what his generosity actually costs." The forged deed scrolled across the screens, magnified until the tracer's identical strokes could not be denied. Wire transfers blinked in and out. Copies of invoices floated. Images of Hazel's charities revealed empty accounts and consulting fees sent to Nevada. The deed I had kept on my nightstand appeared again, corner crease and all. The room inhaled. Reporters rose. Phones became flares. Men who had once smiled at my father's table looked for exits. Father Robert tried to speak. His voice thinned under the lights. Hazel froze hand to mouth. Mother Evelyn pressed a napkin to her cheek and began to cry, small and surprised. The theater of their life snapped. After the screens, everything moved faster than my plan allowed. Banks froze accounts. Auditors walked corridors quiet for years. Lawyers flung papers like breadcrumbs. Investigators called with curt voices. Allies turned away. Hazel's name ran across tabloids. The charity collapsed. The man from the hotel vanished. Father Robert fought in courtrooms, his voice losing volume with every filed motion. He sat 3 months later gripping a cane. People asked me if I wanted the estate. They asked if I wanted portraits in a vineyard I'd never walked. I did not. The deed was never about marble. It was about power. It was about them trying to write my life in someone else's ink. I wanted my name back. I wanted to look in a mirror and find myself. Weeks after the judge's rulings, Mother Evelyn called. Her voice was thin and older. "Anna," she said. She did not ask forgiveness. She gave a small thing instead, truth. "I watched," she whispered. "I did not know how to stop it." She told me of fear and habit. She said she had finally spoken to a priest and handed a list to an investigator. Her admission folded years in half. I said, "I know." It was all I could give then. On the last morning I drove to the estate. Rain had left the road wet. The gravel smelled like iron. The gate stood closed. Cameras watched like small black beetles. I took the keys out of my purse. I walked to the mailbox and felt cold metal in my fingers. I said to no one, "You can keep the walls." I dropped the keys in the slot and closed the lid. I left without looking back. Sometimes at night I fold the deed and feel the crease. I put it in an envelope with old postcards and receipts. Things that smell like summer and clean paper. Putting it away was not surrender. It was inventory. It was proof that I had taken the story of my life back into my hands. If there is a lesson, it is this. Small persistent truths can undo a house built on lies. Collect enough of them and people will be forced to see the architecture of deception. They tried to write me out of my future. I made them remember my name. What would you have done if your own blood had signed you out of your future? Would you have left quietly, or would you have made them remember your name?